The training hangar was the heart of the Galactic Union's Xenological Integration Academy. It was a vast space, so large that the curved ceiling was often lost in a haze of artificial light and drifting maintenance drones. The air always smelled of ozone, hot metal, and the distinct musky scent of various alien species. The floor was a tough, polished material that could withstand incredible weight and heat. All along the walls were massive pieces of machinery, engine simulators, communication arrays, and weapons systems from 100 different worlds. In this cavern of technology, the new cadets learned to work together. Or at least that was the idea. Today, the hangar was full of noise and movement. A group of hulking Tarkians, their skin like gray granite, were effortlessly moving heavy cargo crates, their deep voices rumbling like an avalanche. A cluster of slender, six-limbed Zill with their large, dark eyes were delicately reassembling a plasma conduit with impossible speed. And then there were the humans. They were the newest species to join the Galactic Union. To the older member species, humans seemed average. They were not exceptionally strong, not exceptionally fast, and their technology was considered primitive. They were trying very hard to prove they belonged. One of the human cadets, a young man named Dae-hyun, was grunting with effort as he tried to secure a magnetic clamp onto a large pipe. His face was red and his muscles strained. This was a simple task for most species, but the clamp was designed for larger, stronger hands. "Come on, Dae-hyun, you can do it," said a young woman named Soo-min. She was watching him, her eyes sharp and analytical. She held a data pad, already having finished her own theoretical work. Nearby, another human cadet was working. Her name was Ji-hee. She was smaller than both Dae-hyun and Soo-min, with a quiet and calm presence. While others struggled with brute force, she was seated at a workbench, performing a fine motor skill drill. The tool in her hand looked like a tiny silver needle. Her task was to thread a microscopic filament through a series of increasingly smaller loops inside a clear box, all without touching the sides. Her hands moved with a gentle, fluid grace. Her fingers were long and slender, and they danced over the controls with a painter's delicate touch. Each movement was precise, confident, and efficient. She completed the drill in a time that would have made a Zill nod in approval. It was these hands that caught the attention of Quan. Quan was a Tarkian cadet, a head taller than the tallest human and twice as broad. His body was a mass of solid muscle and thick, rocky hide. He was the type who believed that strength was the only thing that mattered. He had been watching the humans with a kind of bored amusement, but his eyes kept coming back to Ji-hee. He walked over, his heavy footsteps thudding on the floor. The group of humans grew tense. Dae-hyun stopped his struggling with the clamp. Soo-min lowered her data pad. Ji-hee, however, did not look up. She simply reset her drill and began again, her focus absolute. "What is this?" Quan's voice was a low grind, like stones crushing together. He pointed a thick, stubby finger at Ji-hee's work. "What are you doing, little human?" Ji-hee paused her work and looked up at him. Her expression was neutral, neither friendly nor afraid. "It is a fine control exercise. For nerve calibration." Quan let out a short, harsh laugh. "It looks like you are sewing, or maybe playing a tiny music instrument." He leaned closer, his large shadow falling over her. "Let me see those tools." Hesitantly, Ji-hee held out the delicate instrument. Quan took it between his thumb and forefinger. It looked impossibly small and fragile in his grasp. He tried to manipulate it, but his fingers were too big and clumsy. He fumbled, almost dropping it. "This is useless," he grumbled, handing it back roughly. "A waste of time. Out in the black, you don't need gentle hands. You need strong hands." He held up his own fist, which was like a small boulder. "You need hands that can rip a hull breach closed. Hands that can lift a fallen beam." His eyes then fell directly on Ji-hee's hands as she took the tool back. "Your hands! They look like they would break if you shook someone's hand. They are like a child's hands. Delicate." He said the word like it was an insult. A few other Tarkians chuckled behind him. Dae-hyun looked down at the floor, his ears turning red with second-hand embarrassment. He wished Ji-hee would just stand up and show some spirit, or better yet, just leave. Soo-min, however, frowned. "Different tasks require different skills, Cadet Quan," she said, her voice crisp. "Precision can be as important as power." Quan ignored her, his attention fixed on Ji-hee. "Why are you even here? With hands like that, you should be in a medical bay putting bandages on people, or maybe in a kitchen decorating food. Not here, not on a starship." Ji-hee listened to all of this. She didn't flinch. She didn't get angry. She simply placed the delicate tool back into its case and closed the lid with a soft click. The sound was final. She looked at Quan, and for a second her calm eyes seemed to look right through him. Then she stood up. "My hands are adequate for my duties," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Adequate?" Quan boomed, laughing again. "I doubt they are adequate to even open a heavy door. You are a liability. Your whole species is a liability, so soft, so fragile." He turned and walked away, shaking his head, his laughter echoing in the hangar. His friends followed him, still chuckling. The tension around the human group broke. Daehyun let out a long breath he didn't realize he was holding. He walked over to Jihai. "You have to just ignore him," Daehyun said, his voice low. "Guys like that. They only understand one thing. Don't give him a reason to notice you, maybe. Maybe don't do those little fancy drills where everyone can see. Just try to blend in." Jihai looked at Daehyun. There was no anger in her gaze, only a mild disappointment. "Hiding what I can do will not make me better. It will not make us better. It will keep you from being a target," Daehyun argued. "We're already the new ones. We don't need to stand out more." Sumin joined them. "I think he's wrong, Jihi. Your hands are amazing. The way you handled that microfilament. I've never seen anyone do it so fast." Jihi gave Sumin a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Sumin." She then looked at her own hands, turning them over. They did look delicate. The skin was smooth, the fingers slim. They were the hands of a pianist or an artist. They did not look like they belonged in a gritty starship hangar, but looks, as she knew better than anyone, could be very, very deceiving. She didn't say anything more. She just picked up her tool case and walked towards the next training station. The other cadets, human and alien alike, watched her go. Some with pity, some with contempt, and a few, like Sumin, with a spark of curiosity. The mockery was over for now, but it hung in the air like the smell of ozone. It was a challenge that had been issued, a judgment that had been passed, and everyone in the hangar knew that a challenge left unanswered would only grow louder. The following week, a new kind of tension filled the training hangar. It was the day of the first major practical exam. The usual scattered groups of cadets were now assembled in neat rows before Instructor Borvin. The instructor was a tall, slender being from a species called the Vrel. He had 4 arms, each moving with independent fluid grace, and his large, compound eyes reflected the hangar lights, making him look as if he saw everything at once. The focus of everyone's attention was the new training module that had been installed in the center of the hangar. It was a mock-up of a starship's emergency generator bay. The walls were lined with flickering control panels and sparking conduit breaches, all safely simulated. The main feature, however, was the damaged power core. This was a training pod, a dense cylindrical object made of a dark magnetic alloy. It was 2 meters long and nearly a meter in diameter. A single red light on its side blinked in a slow warning rhythm. Instructor Borvin's voice, a dry, multitonal buzz, addressed the cadets. Today's simulation is a zero-gravity rescue and repair scenario. A hull breach in the adjacent bay has caused a pressure explosion. The artificial gravity is offline. The primary power core has been dislodged from its housing. One of his arms gestured elegantly towards the pod. Your task is to enter the bay, stabilize the environment, and move the core onto a gravity sled so it can be transported to a secure location for repairs. The core is simulated to weigh approximately 800 kilograms in standard gravity. You will be graded on speed, safety, and teamwork. A low murmur went through the crowd. 800 kilograms was a significant weight. For most species, it was a heavy but manageable team lift. For the Tarkians, it was likely a one-person job. Quan stood with his arms crossed, a confident smirk on his rocky face. He looked over at the group of humans, his eyes lingering on Jihai for a moment before moving on. The message was clear. This was a test of strength, and they had none. The first team was a group of Zil cadets. They swarmed the module, their 6 limbs allowing them to anchor themselves and manipulate the environment with incredible efficiency. They did not try to lift the core. Instead, they worked together, using their combined strength to carefully roll it onto the waiting gravity sled. They completed the task quickly and silently, earning a nod of approval from Borvan. Next were the Tarkians. Quan stepped forward, volunteering to go first for his team. He attached his magnetic boots to the deck with a loud clank and approached the core. He positioned himself, bent his thick legs, and wrapped his massive arms around the middle of the cylinder. He grunted. The muscles in his back and shoulders bunched into solid knots. With a raw, guttural roar, he strained upwards. The pod lifted just a few centimeters from the deck. He held it there for a couple of seconds, the veins on his neck standing out, before he shoved it violently forward onto the sled. The sled dipped sharply under the sudden weight. He stood up, breathing heavily, and slammed a fist against his chest in a gesture of triumph. His fellow Tarkians grunted and clapped him on the back. It was a display of pure brute power. He looked over at the humans, his chest puffed out. Then it was the humans' turn. Daehyun led the way, his face set in a mask of determination. Sumin and 2 other human cadets followed. Ji-hai was with them, moving to her assigned position at one of the sparking control panels, her task being to simulate the stabilization of the power grid. The simulation began. Alarm lights flashed. Daehyun and the others moved towards the core. They positioned themselves around it, trying to find good handholds on the smooth, featureless metal. On 3, Daehyun called out. 1, 2, 3, they all heaved. The core shifted slightly, scraping against the deck, but it did not lift. It was impossibly heavy. They tried again, their faces turning red with strain. One of the cadets lost his grip and stumbled back. It was quickly becoming clear that a team lift was not going to work. Use the sled, Sumin shouted. Tilt it and slide the sled under. They tried to push the core onto its side, but it was too dense, too unwieldy. They struggled, their movements growing more frantic as the simulation timer counted down. Daehyun's arms were trembling with effort. It was a painful public display of their physical inadequacy. From the sidelines, Kwon laughed. It was not a quiet chuckle, but a loud, booming sound that echoed in the hangar. Look at them. They are like insects trying to move a rock. His laughter was joined by a few others. The humans at the core, humiliated and exhausted, stopped their efforts. Daehyun looked down, his shoulders slumping in defeat. It was then that Kwon's eyes found Ji-hai. She had finished her console work and was standing quietly, observing the failed attempt. Her delicate hands were clasped in front of her. Kwon pointed directly at her. Maybe she can help, he jeered. Maybe her little hands can tickle it into moving. Or perhaps she can ask it nicely to get on the sled. The laughter grew louder. All the frustration and mockery of the past week seemed to crystallize in that one moment. The other species watched, some with pity, some with amusement at the spectacle of the humans' failure and the ridicule of their smallest member. Daehyun felt a hot flush of shame. He wished Ji-hai would just disappear. Her presence, her calmness in the face of their struggle felt like an accusation. But Ji-hai did not disappear. She did not look away in shame. She turned her head and looked right at Kwon. Then her gaze shifted to Instructor Borvan. The hangar grew quiet. The laughter died away. Everyone could feel that something was about to happen. Ji-hai took a step away from her console. Her voice was calm and clear, cutting through the silence. Instructor, she said, permission to attempt the core retrieval. Without the sled. A wave of stunned whispers swept through the cadets. Without the sled? It was impossible. It was suicide. The core was too heavy. Instructor Borvan's multifaceted eyes regarded her. Cadet Ji-hee. The core mass is 800 kilograms. The protocol is clear. It requires a team and a gravity sled for safe movement. I understand the protocol, sir, Ji-hai replied, her tone respectful but firm. I am requesting an exception. Borvan was silent for a long moment. He was a fair instructor, but he did not tolerate grandstanding. He saw the quiet confidence in her posture, the complete lack of boastfulness. He was above all a scientist, curious about the capabilities of new species. Your safety is your responsibility, cadet, he said finally. Permission granted, proceed. A new electric tension filled the air. This was no longer just an exam. It was a challenge. It was a response. Sumin watched, her datapad forgotten in her hands, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. Daehyun could only stare, his mind refusing to process what was happening. Kwon folded his arms again, his smirk wider than ever. He was expecting a comedy. He was expecting her to strain and fail pathetically, proving his point once and for all. Ji-hai walked towards the heavy magnetic training pod. Every eye in the massive hangar was locked on her small, solitary figure as she approached the immense weight she had claimed she could move. The silence in the hangar was now absolute. It was a heavy, waiting silence. broken only by the low hum of the station systems and the faint, simulated sparking from the training module. All the previous laughter and mockery had vanished, replaced by a thick, disbelieving tension. Ji-hai walked with a calm, measured pace. She did not rush. She did not look at the crowd of cadets whose eyes were burning into her. Her entire focus was on the dark, metallic cylinder lying on the deck. The blinking red light on its side painted a rhythmic pulse across her face as she approached. Sumin held her breath. She saw not a girl walking towards an impossible task, but an engineer approaching a complex problem. There was no fear in Ji-hai's posture, only a deep and steady concentration. Dae-hyun felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He wanted to shout at her to stop, to not make their humiliation even worse. In his mind, this could only end in catastrophic failure. She would hurt herself or simply not be able to move the pod at all, and the ridicule would become permanent. Kwon watched, his arms still crossed, his expression one of smug anticipation. He was waiting for the punchline of a joke. He imagined her tiny hands slipping off the smooth metal, her body straining uselessly. It would be the final proof that humans were weak, and that this particular human was the weakest of them all. Ji-hai reached the pod. She did not immediately try to lift it. Instead, she slowly walked around it, her head tilted. She was studying it. Her eyes traced its length, its shape, the way it rested on the deck. She was not looking at it as a weight to be conquered, but as an object with a specific structure and balance. She stopped at one end of the cylinder. She knelt down on one knee, bringing her eye level close to the pod. She reached out with her right hand, but she did not try to grip it. Her fingers, long and slender, gently brushed against the cool, dark alloy. She ran her fingertips along a seemingly seamless section near the base. To the others, it looked strange. It looked like a caress. It looked like she was stalling. "What is she doing?" a Tarkian muttered. "Is she saying goodbye to it?" Kwon snorted. "She is praying to it. Maybe her gods will lift it for her." But Instructor Borvan watched intently. His multiple arms were still. He recognized this behavior. It was not the behavior of someone who was about to make a futile attempt. It was the behavior of a technician assessing a tool, a pilot running a pre-flight check. There was a method here. Ji-hai closed her eyes for a second. Her breathing was slow and even. In her mind, she was not in a hangar full of judging aliens. She was somewhere else entirely. She was in a different kind of room, with a different kind of gravity, learning a different kind of lesson. The memory was as clear as the metal under her fingers. She opened her eyes. Her focus was now a laser. She had found what she was looking for. There was a nearly invisible recess, a shallow lip where two sections of the pod were fused together. It was not a handle. It was not designed for lifting, but it was a point of structural integrity. She shifted her position. She did not plant her feet wide and squat like Kwon had done. Instead, she stood beside the pod, her feet shoulder-width apart, her knees slightly bent. It was a stance of balance, not of raw power. It was the stance of a dancer or a martial artist, ready to move with a force, not just against it. She placed her left hand flat against the curved side of the pod, as if to steady it. Then, with her right hand, she slid her slender fingers into the shallow recess she had found, her palm pressed flat against the cool metal. Her grip did not look strong. It looked precise. This was the moment. The tension in the hangar was so thick it felt difficult to breathe. The cadets were leaning forward, their disbelief warring with a dawning, impossible curiosity. Kwon's smirk was still there, but it had become fixed, a little less sure. This did not look like someone who was about to fail pathetically. This looked like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Dae-hyun stared, his mouth slightly open. He saw the absolute certainty on Ji-hai's face. There was no doubt there, no hesitation. For the first time, a tiny, wild thought entered his mind. What if? Sumin watched Ji-hee's hands. She saw how every finger was placed with intention. She saw the calm readiness in her posture. She wasn't just trying to lift a weight. She was preparing to perform an action she had done 1,000 times before. Ji-hai took one last soft breath. She looked not at the pod, but at a point on the far wall, centering herself. The entire universe for her had shrunk down to the connection between her hand and the metal. Then she pushed. There was no loud grunt. No roar of effort. There was only the sound of her exhale, a soft rush of air, and then another sound, a deep, metallic groan. The pod moved. It was not a shift or a wobble. The end of the massive cylinder, the end where her hand was tucked under the lip, began to rise. It rose smoothly, steadily, as if lifted by a hidden hydraulic piston. There was no shake, no tremble in her arm. It was a clean, controlled, and impossible lift. The blinking red light on the pod's side now cast its glow upwards, illuminating the underside of Ji-Hai's arm. The delicate muscles in her forearm were defined, not bulging, but clearly engaged. Her slender wrist was straight and firm. The pod continued to rise past her knee, past her waist. She was lifting it one-handed. Her left hand remained flat against its side, not supporting the weight but guiding it. The silence shattered into a wave of gasps and disbelieving murmurs. A Zil cadet took an involuntary step back. Atarkian's jaw hung open. Quan's smirk was gone. His arms had fallen to his sides. His eyes were wide with pure, uncomprehending shock. He was watching the laws of his universe being rewritten before him. The delicate hands he had mocked were now performing a feat of strength he could barely comprehend. Dae-hyun felt the world tilt. His embarrassment, his anxiety, all of it was washed away by a tidal wave of awe. He was looking at Ji-Hai, but he was not seeing the quiet, petite girl anymore. He was seeing something entirely new. Ji-Hai's arm was now fully extended above her head. The 800-kilogram training pod was held aloft, perfectly vertical in her one hand. The magnetic locks inside it whined in a high-pitched protest against the unnatural force holding it. She stood there, a small, calm figure under an immense weight, her face still a mask of serene concentration. She had not just lifted the pod. She had held it up for the entire galaxy to see. And in that silent, breathtaking moment, every single assumption about humanity, and about her, came crashing down. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The only sounds were the hum of the station and the strained, high-pitched whine from the magnetic core in Ji-Hai's hand. It was a sound no one had ever heard before, because no one had ever held the training pod in that position. The pod, a dark and heavy pillar against the bright hangar lights, seemed to defy gravity. And the slender arm holding it aloft seemed to defy all understanding. Ji-Hai's expression had not changed. There was no strain, no triumphant smile. There was only the calm focus of someone completing a practiced task. She held the pose for 5 full seconds. It was long enough for every cadet to sear the image into their memory. Long enough for the reality of it to sink in, destroying their old beliefs. Then, with the same smooth, controlled motion, she began to lower it. Her arm descended, not in a hurried drop, but with the same deliberate care she had used to lift it. The pod descended as if on an invisible string. There was no crashing, no jarring impact. The dark cylinder settled back onto the deck with a soft, definitive clang that echoed in the stunned silence. The sound seemed to break the spell. Ji-Hai straightened up. She flexed the fingers of her right hand once, then let both arms fall to her sides. She turned to face Instructor Borvin. "The core is stabilized for transport, sir," she said, her voice as quiet and even as it had been before. But the world was no longer quiet. A wave of sound erupted. It wasn't cheers. It was a chaos of exclamations, questions, and disbelieving shouts in a dozen different languages. The neat rows of cadets broke apart as everyone started talking at once, pointing at Ji-Hai, at the pod, at each other. Su-min was the first to reach her. She didn't know what to say. Her sharp, analytical mind was racing, trying to fit this new data into everything she knew about physics and biology. It was impossible. "Ji-Hai, how?" was all she could manage, her eyes wide with awe. Dae-hyun just stood where he was, his body frozen. He looked from the solid, heavy pod to Ji-Hai's delicate hand. He remembered his own words to her. Maybe don't do those little fancy drills where everyone can see. Just try to blend in. A hot flush of shame washed over him, but it was quickly followed by a surge of fierce, unexpected pride. She hadn't blended in. She had shown them all. He had been so worried about what the others thought that he had never stopped to wonder what Ji-Hai was truly capable of. But all eyes eventually turned from Ji-Hai to Quan. The large Tarkian was still standing in the same spot. His confidence had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell of shock. His rocky face, usually set in a permanent scowl, was slack with confusion. He was staring at the pod as if it had betrayed him. He had lifted one end of it. He had strained with all his might for a few seconds. She had lifted the entire thing, one-handed, and held it with the ease of someone holding a datapad. His entire worldview was built on a simple idea: bigger and stronger was better. He was bigger and stronger than the humans, therefore he was better. It was a truth as solid as the ground beneath his feet. Now that ground was crumbling. He looked at Ji-hai. He saw the same small, quiet person, but he no longer saw delicacy. He saw something else. He saw a hidden power that was so great, it didn't need to show itself in bulging muscles or loud boasts. It was a power that was so integrated, so normal to her, that she used her incredible strength to perform tasks requiring the touch of a surgeon. The mockery he had spewed moments before now felt foolish and hollow. He had been laughing at a starship engine for being too quiet. Instructor Borvin walked forward, his forearms moving in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. The chatter in the hangar died down as he approached Ji-hai. The cadets needed an explanation. They needed to understand. "Cadet Ji-hai," Borvin said, his multitonal voice cutting through the remaining whispers. That was not in the training manuals. He paused, his compound eyes taking in every detail of her. "An explanation is required, for the educational benefit of all cadets." Ji-hai nodded. She looked out at the crowd, not with arrogance, but with a simple readiness to answer. Her eyes met Kwan's for a moment. He flinched and looked away, unable to hold her gaze. She turned back to Borvin and began to speak, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the hangar. "It is a matter of environment," she said. "You all learn to lift heavy things. My people learn to not be crushed by them." She held up her hand again, showing its slender form. "These hands are not delicate. They are efficient. My body is not weak. It is condensed." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Humanity has not always lived on planets like Earth. My family, for many generations, lived on a ship. A generation ship. It was called the Morning Star. Our journey was long. It took us through a region of space known as the Caleb Vortex. The gravity there was unstable. It would shift without warning. One moment it would be like Earth. The next it would be 3, 4, even 5 times heavier. A new understanding silence fell over the hangar. They were all cadets. They understood physics. They knew what that meant. The ship's gravity shields were not perfect, Ji-hai continued. They failed. Often. When they failed, everything became crushingly heavy. The air itself felt like water. To breathe was a struggle. To move was a fight for survival. If you were not strong enough, your own body would collapse. Your bones would break. Your heart would stop. She looked at her hands. We adapted or we died. Over generations, our bodies changed. Our bones became denser. Our muscle fibers became tighter, more powerful. We did not grow large because large bodies require more energy and are harder to move in high gravity. We became compact, strong. Every movement, every muscle is designed for maximum force with minimum waste. She gestured to the training pod. Lifting that is not difficult for me. It is normal. What is difficult for me is the fine control drill. My people have great strength, but we had to relearn delicacy. We had to train our children for years to handle tools without breaking them, to touch a console without cracking the screen. My delicate hands are not natural. They are the result of a lifetime of training to control the strength that is natural to me. She finally looked directly at Kwan. You learn to lift heavy things. My people learned to hold a starship together with our bare hands when the gravity shields failed. We learned to carry our friends to safety when the weight would crush a normal person. We learned to survive in a place that wanted to flatten us into dust. She finished speaking. The silence that followed was deep and respectful. The ridicule was gone. In its place was a profound and humbling understanding. They had not been looking at a weak human. They had been looking at a human who was so strong, she had to consciously hold herself back every second of every day just to function in their normal world. Kwan finally looked at her again. The shame on his face was clear. He gave a slow, stiff nod. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement. He had been wrong. Instructor Borvin slowly nodded his head. A remarkable adaptation, he buzzed. The Galactic Union has much to learn about humanity, and it seems we have much to learn from Cadet Ji-hai. He turned to the assembled cadets. This session is concluded. You are all dismissed, but no one moved immediately. They all watched as Ji-hai turned and, with Su-min at her side, walked calmly away from the training pod, leaving a stunned and thoughtful crowd behind. The rest of the day passed in a blur for everyone in the hangar. The cadets moved to their next classes, but their minds were not on the lessons. They were replaying the image of Ji-hai holding the massive pod over her head. The story spread through the station faster than a computer virus. By the time the evening meal came, everyone knew about the human from the Generation ship. In the human dormitory common room, the atmosphere was different. Before, there had been a feeling of tension, of trying hard to fit in. Now there was a new energy, a feeling of quiet confidence. Ji-hai was sitting at a table eating a simple meal. She was not surrounded by a crowd, but she was no longer alone. Su-min was with her, talking excitedly about the biomechanics of her strength. A few other human cadets sat nearby, listening with rapt attention. Dae-hyun stood near the doorway for a moment, watching. He felt a knot of guilt in his stomach. He took a deep breath and walked over to the table. Ji-hai, he said. His voice was quiet. She looked up at him. Her expression was calm as always. There was no anger in her eyes, no accusation. I am sorry, Dae-hyun said, the words feeling clumsy. I was wrong. I told you to hide. I was embarrassed by you. I was a fool. Ji-hai considered him for a moment. Then she gave a small, gentle smile. You were trying to protect the group. It is a good instinct. But we do not need protection by hiding what we are. We need to show what we are capable of. Su-min nodded vigorously. She's right, Dae-hyun. We've been acting like we're less than them. But we're not. We're just different. Across the common room near the food dispensers, a large shadow fell over the floor. Kwon was standing there. He looked uncomfortable, his massive form seeming out of place in the human living area. The quiet conversations in the room stopped. Everyone watched him. He hesitated, then walked slowly towards Ji-hai's table. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes on the floor. He did not speak for a long time. The whole room waited. Finally, he looked at Ji-hai. Your people, he began, his voice a low rumble. They carry starships, it wasn't a question. It was a statement of awe. Ji-hee nodded. When we have to. Kwon looked at his own hands, his thick, powerful fingers that were designed for breaking and crushing. I thought strength was for fighting. For winning battles. He looked back at her. Your strength is for surviving, for saving. He took a step closer. I mocked your hands. I was ignorant. My words were without honor. He gave a short, stiff bow from his waist. It was a formal gesture, a Tarkian sign of deep respect and apology. The human cadet stared in shock. They had never seen a Tarkian bow to anyone, especially not to a human. Ji-hai stood up. She was so much smaller than him, but in that moment she commanded the room. Your apology is accepted, Cadet Kwon, she said formally. Then her tone softened. We all have different kinds of strength. The Union needs all of them. Kwon nodded once, a look of profound relief on his face. He turned and left the common room, his footsteps heavy but no longer threatening. After he was gone, a collective sigh seemed to go through the room. Then a slow smile spread across Dae-hyun's face. He looked at Ji-hai, then at the others. He bowed, he said, almost laughing in disbelief. The ice was broken. Other cadets came over, asking Ji-hai questions about the Morning Star, about what it was like to grow up with such strength. For the first time, the humans were not talking about how to be like the other species. They were talking about what it meant to be human. The next day, during a joint engineering drill, the dynamic had completely changed. The task was to stabilize a wobbly structural beam that had come loose in a simulation of battle damage. Before, the Tarkians would have simply pushed it back into place while the humans handled the finer wiring. This time, Kwon looked at the beam, then at Ji-hai. The lock is bent, he grumbled. It needs to be held steady with one hand while the housing is hammered back with the other. My hands are too big for the housing. Ji-hai understood. She walked to the beam. She placed one hand on the bent metal lock and pushed. The metal groaned as she forced it back into perfect alignment, holding it there with an immovable steadiness. Now, she said to Kwon. Kwon picked up a heavy tool. With 3 precise, powerful strikes, he hammered the housing back into place around the lock she was holding. The beam was secure. It was teamwork. It was using their different strengths together to solve a problem faster and better than either could have alone. The instructor monitoring the drill made a note on his data pad. He had never seen such efficient cooperation between the two species. Later that week, Instructor Borvin called Ji-hai to his office. The room was filled with floating holographic displays of schematics and biological data. Cadet Ji-hai, he said, your performance and your explanation has prompted a review of human physical standards. The Union's records were based on data from Earth. We had no data on the variant strains of humanity. He gestured to a hologram of a human skeleton, its density readings highlighted. Your adaptation is remarkable. We are redesigning some of the training equipment. There will be new, heavier options for those who need them, and we are adding more advanced fine control modules based on the drills you are running. It seems your delicate hands have shown us a gap in our own training. Jihai felt a small surge of pride. Thank you, sir. Do not thank me, Borvin buzzed. You have taught us. The Union believed it was integrating a standard single-species planet. We are now learning that humanity is not a single note but a complex symphony. We have only been listening to one part of the song. As Jihai left his office, she saw a group of cadets in the hallway, humans, Tarkians, and Zil, all talking together. They were discussing the best way to modify a power conduit, each offering insights from their own unique perspectives. Quan was there listening intently to a small human cadet explain a wiring diagram. No one was ridiculing anyone. No one was trying to hide. Jihai walked back to her quarters, her steps light. She looked at her hands. They were the same hands that had been mocked just days before. They were the same hands that could lift a training pod or thread a microscopic filament. They were not a liability. They were a bridge. She had not just lifted a heavy object. She had lifted an idea. She had shown everyone that strength has many faces, and that the gentlest hand could hold the greatest power. And in doing so, she had not only found her place in the stars, but she had also helped make a place for all of humanity.